tipping the scales, the latest at 300 pounds.
Well, I was fat when I came into the NBA, but I was lazy.
Here's Charles Barkley.
Was I born to be great? Probably. Was I born to run? Sometime. Was I born to be wild? Most definitely.
The slam. Barkley all the way.
I believe it is our destiny to win the world championship.
Is this window going to be totally closed if you don't do it this time?
1980 Alabama. Charles Barkley, the junior for the Green Wave, was the team's point guard, standing at 5'11", fat, and a career in basketball seemingly distant. But within years he sprouted to 6'5", filling out his wide frame, not the other way round. Barkley was thus a late bloomer and had projections to only get taller as years went by. Yet glaringly the forward stagnated in height, but his ball handling skills from his time at the point and rebounding grit developed in recent years in the front court culminated into a dynamic weapon at Auburn in college. Yet whilst he stuffed the stat sheet at the collegiate level, Auburn utilised his weight as a means to create an image of him and to promote their program. So all anyone could talk about was how many pizzas or chickens Charles Barkley had eaten. For right or wrong, his weight had now become a focal talking point in his basketball assessment. But in spite of its validity, Barkley could do things no man of his stature should be able to do. The undersized forward dominated his 3 years at college to lead the SEC in rebounding every year, leading the Tigers to their first ever NCAA tournament appearance. He filled the seats of fans and scouts to establish himself as a top talent in the 1984 NBA draft. But upon realization that the NBA had a hard cap and his top suitor Philadelphia could only offer him $75,000, Barkley went on an eating binge in a bid to tank his draft stocks. But nevertheless, on the 19th of June 1984, Charles Barkley stood on the podium, disappointed, puzzled, as he was selected 5th overall to Philadelphia, following the likes of Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon in his class. Except those two went to bad rebuilding teams that had lost their way to high overall selections. But the 76ers had acquired the Clippers' first round pick from a trade 6 years prior. So a team that had just won a ring 2 years ago and had 5 consecutive 50-win seasons had just acquired one of the best prospects in the class. Yet amongst all the promise was a still fat 21-year-old. So the prudent Moses Malone called him fat and lazy and proceeded to take him under his wing. Barkley weighed a monstrous 300 pounds for training camp, but slowly under Malone's guidance he lost 10 pounds at a time until he got to 255 pounds. Malone had filled the gap that Barkley's abandoned father had left him, Charles referring to him as Dad.
Hey, Dad, how you doing?
So as Charles shedded weight, the fast breaks got quicker, the feet elevated higher, and his playing time only grew, starting the remaining 60 games of the regular season.
And he may be the biggest thing to hit Philadelphia in some time.
But as a whole, the Sixers were somewhat of a mystery come playoff time, with inconsistent swings in the regular season and their 58 wins still trailing the powerhouse 60-win Lakers and Celtics. Their first round defeat of the Bullets did little to suggest otherwise, as Barkley was relegated to the bench but remained undeterred to lead the series in rebounding nevertheless. But a team that had been coasting for weeks regained their fire, sweeping the Bucks in 4 games to set up a series against their rivals. However, the Celtics posed a greater challenge, and the aging Sixers were clearly outmatched, benching Dr. J for Barkley when it mattered in the 4th of Game 1. But it made little difference, spiralling to 0-3 in the series, where a late decision to move Charles to the starting lineup in Game 4 helped trigger the dire 76ers offense with 15 points and 20 boards as he announced himself to the NBA world. But a stolen game meant little, going back to the Celtics' garden. But down by 2, the 76ers had a chance to steal one, but Bird's quick hands stole the victory from Philly, bouncing him out of the playoffs. It was a 76ers team slowly descending from their championship years, Barkley one of their only sure things going forward. So as transition was forecasted, it began with championship coach Billy Cunningham retiring, but his departure triggered a troubled start for Philly, and Charles, in only his second year, called a players-only meeting, a daring move on a roster full of Hall of Famers that unfairly drew criticism for the young man. This is Doc's team, not Charles Barkley's. Yet he silenced any uproar with a career-high 30 points to snap the losing streak and propel a promising season. Unfortunately though, despite turning their season around, they limped into the playoffs without Moses Malone. Thankfully, a poor Bullets team awaited, and Barkley would have to pass the superstar litmus test when doubles were thrown his way. But Barkley passed with flying colours, quick enough to bypass the doubles and skillful enough to make the pass, effectively shouldering the load to carry the 76ers into the next rounds. And in an even matchup against the Bucks, the two evenly matched teams went back and forth until the 76ers forced a Game 7 in Milwaukee. Expectedly close, the Sixers were down, and with a minute left, the main man gave them the lead on two different occasions, getting into the rim with ease. Yet his goaltend on the other end gave the Bucks an irrefutable lead as Irving clanked an open jumper off rim to win them the series. It was heartbreak for Barkley, who sat on the bench for minutes, berated by a bitter Milwaukee crowd. A man who at one point looked like he had the whole of Philadelphia on his back, with averages of 28 and 15 for the series, in spite of all the attention he had received. There was no doubt who was next up in Philadelphia. The Sixers were undeniably aging. Julius Erving, a legend, was 36, Maurice Cheeks had 30, Andrew Toney's footy shoes left him ineffective, and Moses Malone, 30, was battling from a major injury. Desperate to inject youth for the Barkley timeline, owner Harold Katz thus orchestrated a seismic trade. Malone and the coveted #1 pick were shipped out. In return, an injury-riddled Jeff Ruland, Cliff Robinson, and Roy Hinson. Barkley was left adrift, his mentor gone, and the franchise in disarray. A move thus projected to cast a shadow over the franchise for years to come. It was simple. You couldn't trade Moses Malone and the #1 pick, who was locked to be star college center Brad Doherty. It was one or the other. One center gone, the other stayed. Missing the playoffs thus seemed likely, yet they scraped together 45 wins in a season that was set up to project their future. Barkley shined as a lone bright spot, where at a tick over 6'5", he led the league in rebounding and field goal percentage. His dominance meant little come playoff time though, as the Sixers roster didn't have the talent to compete with the league's best, falling to Milwaukee for the second year running. Dr. J's farewell tour had overshadowed what was an embarrassing day in Philadelphian sports history. Ruland, the injury-riddled center, missed nearly the entire year, retiring in the offseason, and Cliff Robinson and Roy Hinson had the worst seasons of their career since their respective rookie years. Harold Katz had put the entire franchise on hold that day in June, and after only a year, it was clear he'd made a catastrophic mistake. So there was little optimism entering the 1987-88 season. Barkley was entering his prime with nothing but role players alongside him. Philadelphia were now on the outside looking in, missing the playoffs for the first time in 13 years, and embarrassing the Sixers' legacy of greatness. So amidst the losses and frustration, Barkley, the flamboyant, controversial, and often juvenile figure, had firmly established himself as the polarizing figure in the NBA. He was arrested for carrying a gun, skipped a game for the fun of it, led the league in techs and ejections, and spoke his mind whenever his team couldn't play up to his standards. Yet importantly, his own standards on the floor had never been greater. It was a season that when the MVP votes were drawn, Barkley sat in fourth, behind Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson. They were the three certifiable, indisputable, non-negotiable impact legends of this league, and Barkley had just added himself alongside them. His antics were now irrelevant as long as he sat with the league's greats. For the following year, slight roster improvements were noticeable, as Hershey Hawkins proved a solid pick in the draft, and Mike Jaminski finally filled the void left by Moses Malone. But amongst another middling year of 46 wins, the talent of Barkley was wasted. They proceeded to embarrass themselves against the Knicks, losing from 3 clutch shots in 3 straight games to get swept. Barkley's postseason play was indisputable, but his denial after the fact meaning little in rectifying a horrid 3-year stretch from a franchise so accustomed to postseason success. To make matters worse, in the following year, Philadelphia started the season at a shaky 18-16, but they turned it around with a 12-game winning streak, setting up a late-season clash to close out the division against Detroit. It was a chance to gain some respectability back after 3 awful years. So when the salty Pistons harassed Philly knowing they'd lost the game, Barkley retaliated to defend his own teammates in an all-out brawl. Irrespective of the fines and suspensions that followed, Philly had added punch to their division title, their first since 1983, having been in the same division as the Celtics. But outside of the regular season, Barkley's nagging shoulder injury only worsened, comparing a free throw shot to being stabbed in the shoulder.
Barkley has had problems with the free throw line.
And not at his best, it was clear this team didn't have the tools to make a deep run. They took it to a deciding Game 5 against an average Cavs team that made them look good in the first round. The team thus needed to be perfect on the road for a chance at a miracle breakthrough against MJ and the Bulls. But when they lost the first 2 games on the road, it was clear they had changed little. Jordan, perhaps to prove a point against his fellow draftee, who mind you still played well, carved up the Sixers, and in the closeout Game 5 he had his lowest scoring game of the series, with 37 points. Jordan and the Bulls' dominance highlighted the gulf between their rosters, underscoring how Katz's missteps had left Barkley without the support needed to truly contend, as he went into the offseason requiring serious shoulder surgery as his team had given him no option to rest through the season. But for the 90-91 season, when training camp arrived, everything shifted. Optimism replaced doubt, and for the first time in years, Barkley felt genuinely excited for the season ahead. On the court, the first game back, they had a statement performance, silencing critics to redeem themselves against the Bulls. Albeit Barkley's post-game comments saying he won't beat his wife weren't appreciated in the national media. Either way, all looked good. The team was sitting pretty at 19-8 and slowly finding their groove. Until a road trip out west, where they lost 4 games on the trot. The trigger-happy front office expectedly pulled the trigger, sending the G-Man to the Hornets, but it left the team with a hole at center. Mahorn's back limited his mobility against the league's best, and Manute Bol was useless outside of his rim protection. The burden on Barkley's shoulders thus grew, both offensively and on the boards, and that's when things truly began to unravel. Late in a victory against the Bucks, Barkley, who had played 42 minutes, scored 37 points, and hauled 12 rebounds, felt a pop in his ankle. The injury sidelined him for weeks, but with the team's first-round pick already traded, losing offered no future benefit, as Barkley rushed back to help the tumbling 76ers. Piled with frustration, Barkley, adding to his list of controversies, spat at a heckler, but wrongly misfired to hit an 8-year-old girl. A suspension, criticism, and an array of boos at home in his return helped Barkley for the first time understand and regret his misdoing, coming to realize he did not need to be mad at anyone. But a season of promise had quickly flipped, as Barkley again injured his knee. In spite of the injury, they swept the Bucks, but against the Bulls they were clearly outmatched once again. For a man with half a body, rushed back from 2 separate injuries, Barkley was as good as he could be, as they lost in 5 for the second consecutive year to the Bulls. More noticeable than ever, this year's workload had taken a toll on Barkley's health, so he confronted the front office with a blunt question. Was this a championship caliber roster? If the answer was yes, he was ready to walk, because it wasn't even close. To his relief, they conceded, promising to bolster the roster in the offseason. Disaster after disaster in the team's recruitment, Barkley had put his faith in Harold Katz once again. It didn't take long in 91-92 for Barkley to come to the realization he'd misplaced his faith once again. The offseason moves proved insignificant.
We've made too many changes, and our chemistry is not there, and everybody's not on the same page.
And again, Barkley's frustrations were overwhelming in a losing season. He walked his way out of Philly all year, firing shots at his GM, getting in post-game fights, and pissing off his teammates. It couldn't have signaled a more necessary trade out of Philadelphia for both parties. Thankfully, a trade to a middling Lakers team fizzled, as Barkley eventually found a home in Phoenix. His talent was undeniable, but lately trouble had followed Charles, so a cheap trade package got him on a contending team with the talent to compete right away, a luxury Charles was never offered in his 8 years in Philadelphia. So with the pieces in place, the pressure fell on Charles to deliver when it mattered most. Fittingly, in his debut for Phoenix, he scored 27 points but was ejected. A perfect encapsulation of Sir Charles, but it was a strong bonded Phoenix team that could tell him to knock it off, and he'd listen. With Barkley as their centerpiece, the team surged to an incredible 21-4 start. Above all, it was clear the Charles Barkley gamble had paid off. Beyond his elite scoring and dominance on the boards though, Barkley brought a hard-nosed Eastern Conference edge to Phoenix, a grittiness that reshaped their identity. Overnight, the Suns had become known as the tough guys of the West, but for Charles there was only one goal, to win. When the playoffs arrived, the regular season accolades, the top seed, the 62 wins meant nothing. First in their path were the Lakers, a matchup so lopsided Charles could sweep them all by himself. But analysts would quickly swallow their words as they went down 2-0 at home. Barkley's 18 points, missing all of his 7 shots in the fourth, put the Phoenix Suns, and more broadly his own legacy, on the table.
I picked a very bad time to have probably my worst game of the year.
We're down 0-2, and I know the next question is, are you guys dead? No, we're going to win the series. We're going to win one Tuesday, and the next game's Thursday. We'll win there, then we'll come back and we'll win the series on Sunday.
Tuesday and Thursday, the squad would make good on Coach Westphal's guarantee to rectify the series and take it to a deciding Game 5. After a couple missed shots, Barkley had to hit with the Suns down 4 and a minute left.
1 minute to go. Barkley must hit it and got it.
And Marley's stunning fadeaway tied it up, sending it to overtime. Having stared down the barrel of elimination, Phoenix dominated in overtime. In what should have been a routine series, the Suns instead emerged from a dramatic battle, but nevertheless advanced to the second round, where they found themselves tied at 2-2 against the Spurs. Charles took matters into his own hands, going for 19 fourth quarter points in an eventual Game 5 victory. And in Game 6, with a chance to end the series, it was a tied game, 10 seconds left, and he answered the call.
It's his game to win, but we go to overtime. Barkley, 20-footer, yes! Charles Barkley with an MVP jump shot.
The same newspapers that dismissed Barkley as a postseason underachiever only a couple weeks ago now rained him with praise. And the grossly over-exaggerated rumors of Phoenix's demise now saw them in the Western Conference Finals. Appropriately, Barkley was rewarded with the MVP in the opening game of the conference finals, but he assured the media that it meant little without a ring. Barkley's play was thus proof of the most valuable, as his 43-point triple-double and Marley's 8 threes gave them a commanding 3-2 lead in Game 5. In stark contrast though, for Game 6, the Sonics tightened their coverage on Barkley, limiting the MVP to 13 points on 4 of 14 shooting. Game 7 now awaited, and the Suns needed a transcendent performance from their leader, and his teammates would follow the lead. So without doubt, he rose to the occasion, leaving rim defenders perilous in stopping him, driving Hall of Fame players off the floor entirely. What was really a 6'4" frame out-muscled, outsmarted, and out-jumped fellow 7-footers to grab 24 rebounds alongside his 44 points. Charles was now the hero the world had expected he could become in Philadelphia, and with the help of the all-round Kevin Johnson and Dan Marley, he was advancing to the NBA Finals.
But I came to Phoenix for one reason, and it wasn't just to get to the finals.
Now at last, he could lead his team into battle for the league's ultimate prize. Yet the battle felt somewhat soured after 2 home losses to go down 0-2, and like that, the Suns' hype train had slowed, and a Bulls three-peat seemed a surefire reality. Game 1's loss went down on nerves, but well, in Game 2, Barkley's 42 points and 13 boards weren't enough when Michael Jordan was on the other end of the floor. For the first time in his career, Barkley hadn't felt like the premier player on the floor. Going into Game 3, Barkley had also required training from an elbow injury incurred in Game 2. In spite of it, Barkley battled, even having the chance to end the game on his own terms, but missed a game-winning jumper in regulation and a fadeaway to win it in the first overtime. But as we reached a third overtime, with Barkley on the boards, KJ silenced his critics, playing 62 minutes for his 25 points and all-round play. And Marley's game-tying jumper in the second overtime had kept Phoenix in it. Michael thus came out roaring for Game 4, manipulating the gritty Suns defense for 55 points, rendering Barkley's 32-point triple-double useless in the loss. No matter how well he played, he wasn't Michael Jordan, where before Game 5, celebrations had already kick-started in Chicago. Windows were boarded up and law enforcement were ready.
I don't know why y'all boarding the city up and everything. I thought you had to win 4 games.
It gave an additional 5 for Phoenix, raining on their riots for a convincing Game 5 win.
Take that shit off the windows. You don't need it tonight.
And the chatty Barkley had gotten confident going back to Phoenix.
I believe it is our destiny to win the world championship.
The prophecy appeared intact as Game 6 neared its end, with the Suns holding a 4-point lead with 40 seconds remaining. But Phoenix let MJ do the one thing they couldn't.
Worst thing that could happen, let him score and use up very few precious seconds.
Nevertheless, Barkley had a chance to personally send it to a Game 7, but he passed out the double team before Marley airballed the open jumper, leaving MJ and the Bulls 13 seconds to cement their dynasty. There were still 4 seconds left as Barkley walked onto the floor, but stunningly the ball ended up in the hands of KJ, whose shot was blocked as the game came to a close, and the MVP of the league hadn't had his chance to exercise his authority in the closing moments. Barkley walked off the court, disbelief etched across his face, knowing they had let their chance slip away. If he'd won the series, it may have been his last on the biggest stage, but he couldn't leave the game without winning it all, so he ran it back for the 93-94 season. Jordan, however, did not. Surrounded by controversies of his gambling whilst mourning his father's death, he left the NBA for baseball. The inevitability of the Chicago Bulls was no longer, leaving a gaping hole for Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns. It began horribly though, as Barkley collapsed in training camp, and combined with a nagging back injury, Barkley again contemplated retirement mid-season. But as a blessing in disguise, Barkley tore a tendon in his quad in January, and after playing through a year of injuries, it was one injury too many. The time off though had healed his back, and as the playoffs neared, Phoenix found their rhythm, riding a 7-game winning streak into the postseason, where whispers of Barkley's retirement only grew louder, and with an aging Phoenix squad, it may never get any better for this team. Golden State thus got the brute end of the stick, mishandled by Phoenix as Barkley poured on 56 points in the concluding Game 3 and one of the great scoring games of all time. But his ailing back flared up once more, leaving him in such pain that he even turned down a round of golf on his off day to receive treatment. Meanwhile, as the 63-win Supersonics got historically upset by Denver, it left Houston and Phoenix to duel it out in the second round for what felt like a championship bout. Stunningly on enemy turf, they won Games 1 and 2, coming back from 18 points down in Game 1 and down 20 in the fourth, they won Game 2, as Charles, having missed a potential game winner, knocked down the dagger.
He's not going to miss that three.
The heart has been taken out of the Houston Rockets right now. They have got a major job on their hands.
As the Houston Chronicle famously labelled them as Choke City, whilst Phoenix newspapers showered the team with hope. Back in Phoenix though, Barkley's performance faltered at the worst possible moment. While Kevin Johnson delivered an extraordinary showing, it couldn't compensate for two of Barkley's worst playoff games, sparking headlines that his injuries had taken their toll, as Houston tied the series on enemy turf. Unfortunately though, in Game 5, Barkley's valiant 30-point night coincided with an 0-6 night from Ceballos and Marley and a 4-for-13 game from Johnson, as Hakeem's presence on either end as the best player in the world only became more apparent.
Barkley and Olajuwon denies again. That's his sixth block. He's had 3 blocks in the last minute.
That damn 84 class. The Suns, once basking in title aspirations, were crumbling under the weight of expectations, plummeting from the penthouse to the outhouse in mere days. A fleeting home victory in Game 6 prolonged the inevitable, as in Game 7, Barkley's 48 minutes of play
He is at the final seconds of a 12-round heavyweight title fight.
couldn't contain Hakeem's ridiculous night. Barkley's shove on Hakeem in the dying seconds symbolised the Suns' collapse and bitter end to their season. Charles was contemplating retiring if his back pain wasn't relieved, but he would opt in for the following year after being convinced by Danny H. Perhaps he'd regret his decision, having missed the first month of the year with a pulled stomach muscle. But upon his return, the team remained a serious threat out west, with the best record of the All-Star break. But tragically, their second leading scorer, Danny Manning, had gone down with a season-ending injury in this same period. Their highest peak of the year would be a turning point for their descent down the standings, as combined with KJ's injuries and the loss of their second option, the Suns stumbled to a less than stellar 20-13 finish. The first round series against an average Portland squad gave them a chance to revitalise themselves, adopting a new brash attitude, sweeping them in 3 games. The momentum flowed into a second round rematch with the Houston Rockets, with a chance to put right the misery of last season, They flew out to a 2-0 series lead on home turf. Local newspapers, seemingly unscarred by past warnings, they declared the Rockets helpless, unable to counter Barkley's dominance. But the celebratory headlines proved the jinx once again, as Barkley went 0 for 10 from the field and scored just 5 points in a Game 3 blowout. So it was KJ who took the reins in Game 4 with 43 points to give them what felt like a non-refundable 3-1 lead going back to Phoenix.
Well, I mean, Houston's a great city, but we don't plan on coming back.
AC Green assuring the media that a collapse simply won't happen. The quote was scribbled in the rooms of the Suns, a reminder to complete the task. But Barkley left a lot to be desired. He scored merely 3 points in the second half, missing 3 huge free throws in the fourth. One of those misses could have pushed the Suns ahead with 17 seconds left.
And he misses again. And I'm going to tell you, you talk about choke city, Barkley has missed all 5 free throws tonight.
But instead, Hakeem's smooth hook tied the game up as the Rockets dismantled them in overtime. Phoenix's golden opportunity to exorcise their demons had gone, and momentum vanished, whereby Barkley's 34 points in Game 6 were overshadowed by his one made field goal in the second half, in what had become a routine Rockets win in Game 6.
I think they're feeling the pressure. I think so.
Phoenix, in spite of it, remained confident, riding down the transport plans to San Antonio for the conference finals in their locker room prior to Game 7, when they of course inevitably advanced. And perhaps it was the writing on the wall as they found themselves up big in the second quarter, but it was a lead they couldn't capitalize on as the game fell even in the fourth quarter. It was Kevin Johnson, not Charles, who had taken over, going shot for shot with Hakeem
In the second half, Kevin Johnson.
until Mario Ellie, who was 0-2 from 3 on the night, chucked up the ballsiest of threes.
Ellie out of the corner for 3, hit it! Mario Ellie with a 3 with 7.1 seconds to play.
Finishing Phoenix off with a kiss of death. Ironically, Phoenix, who couldn't buy a free throw in this building in Game 5, at the hand of Danny Ainge, accidentally banked in an attempted missed free throw, and whose game-tying shot fell short. 2 Game 7 chokes in 2 years, both at the hands of the eventual champions, the Houston Rockets. Again, what followed was another season of uncertainty with their main star, Charles Barkley. Of course he returned, but what followed was an inferior season. The Suns simply imploded. Its defense that had steadily worsened each year, and injuries to key players compounded the struggles, leading to a dismal 14-19 as longtime coach Paul Westphal was fired and Fitzsimmons hired. Rumours lingered of Barkley's departure, but nothing got over the line mid-season. The team rallied to reach the playoffs, only to be decisively eliminated by the Spurs in a lopsided 4-game series. This offseason wasn't about whether Barkley would step away from the game like it had in years prior, but rather where his next chapter would unfold. For Phoenix, the writing was on the wall, as his eventful but ultimately unsuccessful tenure in Phoenix was over, finding himself a new home in Houston, hoping to ride the coattails of 2 other Hall of Famers for one last championship run before they all got too old. But expectedly, the big 3 would deal with nagging injuries through the year, but when together on the court, they blended beautifully, going 32-8 together in the regular season. Barkley had adjusted to role as third fiddle well, getting his touches through a career rebounding year. He played a critical role in dispatching Seattle in a grueling 7-game series. Notably, his 20-point, 14-rebound night saved them from blowing a 3-1 lead, as the media were quick to write home about the success of the Barkley trade. However, it was premature news, as Houston faltered in the Western Conference Finals against Utah, falling to Stockton's brilliance.
Stockton, open 3, hit it! John Stockton sends the Utah Jazz to the NBA Finals.
The deep run was great, but the Rockets were clearly a declining asset. The key players were a year older, and Vegas was skeptical as a result, where a year filled with injuries followed. Hakeem was wearing out, and Charles battled through a hernia, admitting he was no longer a great player, but just a good one. Come playoff time, Barkley was thus of little use, as the aching and aging Rockets lost to the Jazz in the first round. The tension and frustration amongst wearing out superstars was apparent. Barkley had called Hakeem a big baby, and Scottie Pippen, whom they signed in 98-99, never gelled with the team. as they fizzled out to the Lakers in the first round of that year.
Yeah, Charles is walking off. You know he's disappointed. He's been looking for that championship ring. It will not happen again this year, but his effort was heroic.
Essentially retiring the core and any idea of a championship run. Barkley blew out his patella tendon 20 games into the 99-2000 season, in an arena where it had all begun. The injury broke Barkley's spirit, coming back late in the year to end on his terms for 6 quick minutes and one final bucket.
He lays it up, misses. With a rebound,
Only fitting that the man who played through everything would finish on his own terms. His career had ended without a ring, but we knew that the second he left Phoenix. The Sixers peaked too early. Phoenix peaked at the same time as MJ and Hakeem, and the '84 draft class was Barkley's ultimate defender. Because for all we know, at 6'5" at the forward spot, no one else could stop him.